was just one phone call. A simple ring in the middle of an ordinary night. But that single moment, that small vibration in the quiet darkness, became the turning point in a story soaked with lies, betrayal, and blood. Welcome to Crime Chronicles Confidential, where we take you deep into the shadows of human nature, into crimes that aren't just about violence, but about what drives people across the line. Today's story isn't just shocking, it's disturbing, because it starts with something we all know, a call, and ends with something we all fear, a murder so cold, so calculating. It leaves behind a silence heavier than death itself. You're about to hear how a single lie, spoken softly over a phone line, unraveled the lives of 3 people, shattered trust, and revealed the monster that lives behind a friendly voice. This isn't just a crime story. It's a journey through deception, fear, and the terrifying realization that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't a weapon but a whisper. Let's begin. The world outside was silent, too silent. A thick darkness hung over the empty road like a heavy blanket. Streetlights flickered faintly, casting long shadows on cracked pavement. Not a single soul stirred. Not a bird. Not a car. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, as if it's waiting for something. Inside a modest apartment, tucked at the edge of the city's industrial district, Ayan lay half asleep on the couch. The television buzzed with static. A half-eaten sandwich sat abandoned on the coffee table. His phone, face down on the armrest, suddenly lit up, and then it rang. Ayan jolted upright. His heart thudded against his ribs. No one ever called at this hour. He stared at the screen. No name, just a number he didn't recognize. Hesitation crept in, but curiosity won. He answered, "Hello." At first, there was nothing, just a breath, slow, measured, then a voice, soft, almost too soft to hear. "He knows. You need to leave. Now." Ayan sat up straighter. Who is this? But the line went dead. Just like that. He stared at the phone, blinking, the screen already dimmed. His heart beat louder than before. Who knew what? Leave? Why? Was it a prank? A mistake? He checked the number again, copied it, and hit call back. This number is not in service. The automated voice informed him, and that's when he noticed something else. The apartment door, he could have sworn he locked it earlier, was now ajar, just slightly. A cold shiver ran through him. He stood up slowly, stepping toward the door, phone still in hand. The hallway outside was empty, but something felt off. The air was still, but not calm, more like suspended. The silence was no longer empty. It was loaded, like the pause before a scream. That one phone call had changed everything. A warning whispered in the dead of night. And Ayan didn't know it yet, but from this moment on, his life was no longer his own. Ollie was the kind of man no one really noticed. Not in a suspicious way, just in that quiet, ordinary sense. He wore neatly pressed shirts, always light blue or white, and he carried a leather briefcase that had seen better days. Every morning, he walked the same route to the bank where he worked as a loan officer, nodding politely at the chai vendor on the corner, holding the door open for elderly clients, and smiling just enough to seem pleasant, but never long enough to invite conversation. On the surface, Ollie was the definition of routine. Predictable, safe. But if you listened closely, if you really paid attention, there was something else. A hesitation in his voice. A pause, almost imperceptible, before answering simple questions. A slight delay before returning a smile. He spoke carefully, as if each word had to pass through several filters before being allowed to leave his lips. His co-workers thought of him as kind but distant, helpful but reserved. No one had ever been to his apartment. No one had ever met his family. When someone once asked about his childhood, Ollie smiled faintly and said it was quiet, before changing the subject. Always smooth, always subtle. Behind his calm demeanor and clean-shaven face, Ollie carried the weight of something unspoken, something dark. At the bank, he was excellent with numbers, a perfectionist. Files were always in order. Deadlines met with precision. But outside those walls, there was little evidence of a personal life. No pictures on his desk. No missed calls from loved ones. His evenings were solitary. Grocery store, small meals, and long walks alone. And yet, his phone bills revealed something odd. Dozens of late-night calls to the same unlisted number. Calls that never lasted more than 2 minutes. No one at the bank knew about these. No one would have guessed he had anything to hide until the night of the phone call. Because what Ayan didn't know was that the number that called him, the warning whispered into the silence, had once belonged to Ollie, and the man everyone thought they knew was about to unravel in ways no one could have imagined. Ollie wasn't just a banker. He was a missing piece in a puzzle that had remained unsolved for years. Maheen looked like someone you'd want to protect, with soft features, wide eyes, and a voice that trembled just enough to sound fragile. She carried herself like someone the world had been unkind to. She walked with the careful steps of someone who didn't want to be seen, yet somehow always drew attention. The kind of attention that made people whisper, "Poor girl," without really knowing her story. She lived in a small apartment above a closed tailor shop, paid her rent on time, and worked at a bookstore downtown. Customers liked her. She recommended poetry and mystery novels with a shy smile and always remembered which regulars preferred which authors. Quiet, polite, unassuming. But behind that carefully constructed image was a history that didn't quite fit together. No one really knew where she was from. She once said she grew up in Lahore, but another time mentioned a school in Islamabad. Her social media accounts were almost empty. No tag friends, no birthday wishes, no history to trace. Her past was a series of foggy answers, vague references, and quickly changed topics. And yet, she always seemed to know more than she let on, especially about Ollie. When investigators eventually began digging, they found something curious. Maheen and Ollie had both worked in the same area 3 years ago, though at different times. A few of Ollie's former clients from that period remembered seeing Maheen nearby. A girl who stood outside in the cold for no reason, who sometimes watched the building but never entered. One of those clients would later say, "I thought she was just waiting for someone, but now, looking back, she was observing." When questioned about Ollie, Maheen denied knowing him beyond a few chance meetings. "He was kind to me," she said softly. "Helped me once when I dropped my purse on the street." Her tone was convincing. Her eyes watered at the memory. But surveillance footage told a different story. A week before the phone call that changed everything, Maheen had visited a public library across town. She hadn't checked out any books. Instead, she'd used a public computer, logged in under a false name, and accessed a private messaging site. Messages were sent to a number linked to a burner phone. That burner phone, as it turned out, was the one that had called Ayan. So who was she? A victim, trapped in someone else's crime? Or a strategist, orchestrating every move from behind a curtain of vulnerability? One thing was certain, Maheen was not what she seemed. And whether she was a pawn or a queen in this deadly game, the board had been set a long time ago, and she knew exactly where every piece belonged. It began with a lie so small, it almost didn't matter. Ollie was sitting in the bank's break room, sipping his usual black coffee, when his manager walked in and casually asked, "Hey, you know a girl named Maheen, right? She dropped your name when she came in last week asking about loan policies." Ollie didn't even pause. "No, never heard of her." That was it. One sentence. Smooth, effortless, a denial that seemed harmless, just a quick response to avoid a longer conversation. But in that moment, Ollie chose to bury something he should have admitted, because the truth was, not only did he know Maheen, he had met her more than once, and not by accident. Weeks earlier, they had exchanged messages on a private forum. It had started as a debate about morality and justice, then shifted into late-night chats about fear, trust, and control. Maheen had been intense, curious, oddly insightful. She asked questions Ollie never expected, about surveillance, untraceable phones, and what it meant to manipulate someone without ever touching them. He answered more than he should have. They never met in person. Or at least, that's what Ollie told himself. Because there was that one night, a cafe, rain falling outside, a woman sitting across from him, claiming to be someone else entirely. They talked for an hour. She asked him if he ever felt invisible, if he ever wished he could just disappear. He said yes. He didn't know then that she was Maheen. So when he lied to his manager, it wasn't to protect himself from scandal, it was to hide how much he'd already given away. Because Ali, for all his precision and caution, had allowed himself to be drawn in, not by affection, not even by desire, but by the thrill of being understood. That one denial, that tiny lie, set off a chain reaction. Days later, his accounts were flagged. An internal audit showed that someone had accessed confidential client records using his credentials. Ali swore he didn't do it, but his login had been used from a library IP address, the same one Maheen had visited. Still, he didn't come clean. Instead, he started deleting messages, changing passwords, and telling more lies to cover the first one. And just like that, he was no longer an observer of the storm. He was standing in the center of it. A small lie, told in passing, became the thread that unraveled everything. Because once you lie to protect a secret, the secret owns you. The message was written at 2:41 a.m., 19 minutes before Ayan received the call that would change everything. It sat unsent in Ali's phone, half-typed, never delivered. A simple warning, no longer than a few lines. He's coming for you. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't trust anyone, not even me. Ali had stared at the screen for nearly 5 minutes, his thumb hovering over the send button. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from something colder, doubt. Doubt that sending the message would make a difference. Doubt that it wasn't already too late. He saved the draft instead, told himself he'd send it in a minute, but the minute never came, because just then there was a knock at his door. 3 sharp raps. Precise. Too precise. He locked the phone, placed it face down, and opened the door to an empty hallway. No one was there, but when he came back, the phone was dark. Off. Not dead. Powered off. The message still unsent. And he did remember turning it off. By the time he rebooted it, the moment was gone. The warning was useless. Events had already begun to unravel. Ayan had already answered the call. The one Ali had meant to stop. Later, when the police recovered the phone from Ali's apartment, they found the draft. Still there. Unsent. Unread. Unseen. And in that moment, it became the cruelest kind of evidence. Not of guilt, but of hesitation. One message. 19 words. That could have changed the course of everything. But it never reached the person who needed it. And sometimes, the worst crimes aren't the ones we commit. They're the ones we could have prevented, but didn't. The police arrived just after sunrise, the sky still bruised with the fading tones of night. Officers moved swiftly, silently, with that grim efficiency that only comes with experience. No sirens, no drama, just quiet footsteps, a knock on the door, and then a search that would pull apart the seams of Ali's carefully stitched life. Detective Faraz led the investigation, a man known for being calm, methodical, almost unervingly composed. He sat across from Ali in a small interrogation room at the station. No shouting, no intimidation, just a file folder, a voice recorder, and a single photograph, Maheen, taken outside the bank. Do you know her? Ali blinked. No, I've seen her around. Maybe she came to the bank once. Faraz leaned back. You're sure? You've never spoken to her outside of work. Ali hesitated. It was barely a pause. A moment too long. But Faraz noticed. He always noticed. They continued. Questions about the phone call. Were you in contact with Ayan the night of the incident? No. Did you receive any unusual messages? No. Were you aware your credentials were used to access restricted client files? Ali said no to everything. But every no led to something else. Forensics found timestamps in the bank system that matched Ali's login, but the access happened during hours Ali claimed to be home. His alibi? Vague. I was watching TV. They pulled phone records. Hundreds of calls to the same unidentified number. Some lasting seconds. Others longer. All placed between midnight and 4 a.m. Who were you calling, Mr. Ali? Must be a mistake. More silence. More contradictions. The investigation deepened. They questioned Maheen. She admitted to visiting the bank, denied knowing Ali personally, claimed the messages were about poetry and philosophy. Nothing illegal. But then came the CCTV footage. From a gas station 2 blocks from Ali's apartment. Ali and Maheen, together, in the same frame, talking. He was handing her something, a small, dark object. She was smiling. He looked nervous. When confronted with the footage, Ali remained still, silent, no denial, no explanation. Detective Faraz closed the file slowly. "Here's the problem," he said. "Every time we find an answer, it doesn't close the door. It opens 3 more. Ali didn't respond, because sometimes silence isn't defense. It's confession. And in this case, the more they dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a simple crime. It was a maze of intentions, half-truths, and missing pieces. And the further they went, the more it felt like someone had designed it to be that way. The phone records were supposed to bring clarity. Cold, digital proof that stripped away emotion, confusion, and memory. Numbers don't lie, or so they thought. But what they found only deepened the mystery. A single number appeared over and over again, unregistered, untraceable, and consistent. This was a number that called Ayan at 3 a.m., the same number Ali had dialed dozens of times in the weeks before, and the same number that had briefly connected to Maheen's device one night, then vanished. The telecom data showed a chilling pattern. The calls were always short, never more than 2 minutes, always at night, and always routed through different cell towers, different parts of the city, sometimes even outside the city limits. Whoever owned that phone was mobile, careful, and knew exactly how to stay invisible. Detective Faraz requested tower triangulation, a crude method, but it gave them movement patterns. The phone wasn't just calling Ali and Ayan, it was circling them, appearing near their homes, then their workplaces, then disappearing again. This wasn't coincidence. This was surveillance. The tech team tracked the SIM to a shipment of prepaid cards purchased 6 months ago from a supermarket chain, paid in cash. No security footage survived. The burner phone itself was never found. Then came the twist. One call, placed from that same number, was answered by a completely different person, a woman named Farhat. She was a retired schoolteacher, living in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She claimed she received a call late one night, a voice asking, "Is he awake yet?" Farhat thought it was a prank. She said no one else in her house had any connection to the case. But the voice, she remembered it clearly. It sounded like a young woman, she said, but not scared. Calm, cold. They ran a voice sample comparison. The pitch matched Maheen's. But Maheen denied everything. "I don't even own a second phone," she said. "Why would I call random strangers in the middle of the night?" The record said otherwise. But the real revelation came when one of the officers noticed something strange. The same number that had called Ali also contacted another number, registered under the name of an old patient at a psychiatric facility, a man who had died 5 years ago. The account had been inactive for years, until recently. Someone was using dead identities. Someone was hiding behind ghosts. The phone wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon, a device designed to spread confusion, manipulate truth, and control fear. And the question that haunted the investigation was no longer who made the call. It was who wanted to be heard without ever being seen. Because someone was orchestrating the entire game, and they were still out there, watching, waiting, calling. The footage came from a small CCTV camera mounted above a grocery store entrance, an old camera with grainy resolution and a limited frame. No one expected it to matter. It was retrieved as part of a routine sweep, a standard procedure. But what it captured would flip the entire investigation on its head. The timestamp read 2:58 a.m., just 2 minutes before Ayan received the call. The scene showed a narrow sidewalk bathed in pale yellow streetlight. A single figure walked into frame. Tall, slender, wearing a long coat and a hood pulled low over their face. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, almost as if counting their steps. They paused just outside the store, reached into their pocket, and pulled out a phone. They dialed, and they waited. 2 minutes later, the call ended. The figure lowered the phone, but didn't move. Instead, they turned and looked straight at the camera. And that was the moment everything changed. Because even through the blur, even through the low quality and shadows. One detail stood out with perfect, terrifying clarity. The figure was wearing a pair of black gloves with white embroidery, an unusual symbol on the knuckles, a symbol that matched the drawing found inside Maheen's journal. A hand-drawn emblem, carefully sketched and labeled the Silent Eye. Until now, investigators believe Maheen acted alone, or perhaps with Ollie, but this footage proved there was someone else. Someone physically present, someone watching everything unfold, someone real. More footage followed, cross-reference from other buildings along the block, different angles, same coat, same gloves. The figure appeared again and again, always near the key players, always just out of focus, always a step ahead. This wasn't just an accomplice. This was a handler, a ghost in the machine. And then came the final blow. In the last frame, the figure pulled off the hood for a brief moment before turning the corner. It wasn't Maheen. It wasn't Ollie. It was someone they didn't recognize. Not in any database. No criminal record. No identity. Just a face. Calm, cold, and completely detached. Someone had been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight. And now, everything they thought they knew about the calls, the lies, the guilt was shattered because the real puppet master had finally stepped into view. And the game was far from over. She sat in the interrogation room, hands folded neatly on the table, her expression unreadable. Maheen didn't look afraid. If anything, she looked relieved, as though holding on to something for too long had finally become too heavy. The room was cold, but she didn't shiver. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask for water. She just sat there, silent, waiting. Detective Faraz entered and placed the evidence folder in front of her. Inside were photos, phone records, CCTV stills, printed messages, pieces of a puzzle that had haunted the department for weeks. He looked her in the eye and asked one question. Why? For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, Maheen exhaled. Her voice was soft, almost conversational. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Faraz leaned in. I just wanted to scare him, she continued. I wanted Ollie to feel what it's like to be watched, to feel powerless, to not know who's pulling the strings. Faraz didn't interrupt. He let her speak. You think you know someone. You trust them. And then they betray you. Quietly, neatly, without leaving a mark. That's what he did to me. She paused and added, not physically, not violently, but emotionally, systematically. He used me. Maheen began to explain. Months ago, she and Ollie had begun an online exchange, an anonymous discussion forum where people explored moral hypotheticals, questions about justice and manipulation. But it didn't stay hypothetical for long. According to her, Ollie led the conversations into darker territory. He talked about how easy it was to influence people, how perception could be weaponized, how truth could be bent until it broke. And Maheen, already teetering on the edge of disillusionment, followed him down the spiral. At first, she said it was a game, messages sent from burner phones, scripting false narratives, making people question what was real. She described it like theater, an elaborate psychological experiment. But then Ollie tried to pull away. He got nervous, wanted to stop, and that, Maheen said, was a betrayal. He lit the fire, she whispered. Then he tried to pretend he didn't smell the smoke. So she escalated. She called Ayan, planted the voice of fear. She accessed records, posed questions, set up the trail. She introduced a third party, the man in the CCTV footage, a drifter she had once helped, someone vulnerable, someone she could control. She fed him lines, dressed him in symbols, placed him like a piece on a board. But she insisted she never meant for anyone to die. When asked about the final events, the murder, her expression changed for the first time. Her voice dropped. That wasn't my plan, she said. I had the script. I followed it. But someone rewrote the ending. Faraz narrowed his eyes. Who? Maheen looked up. Her eyes were no longer flat. They were frightened. I don't know, she whispered. But they were watching too. And with that, the room went quiet again. Because for all the truths she confessed, one thing became chillingly clear. Maheen wasn't the only puppeteer. She was a queen, yes, but maybe not the one who set the board. The question echoed through every hallway of the investigation room, whispered in coffee breaks, scribbled in margins of case files, and murmured between detectives late at night when the evidence didn't line up. Who was the killer? Every clue led to a face. Every face led to a motive. And every motive came with just enough truth to be convincing, and just enough doubt to be dangerous. Ali had the opportunity. He had the access. He had the knowledge. A man hiding secrets behind silence, whose lies piled up so quickly they buried the version of himself he once tried to protect. He had the intelligence to manipulate, the proximity to act, and, possibly, the desperation to kill. But Maheen had the design. She had been playing this game longer than anyone realized. She orchestrated fear like a composer writing music. She admitted to manipulation, deception, psychological control. And she created a maze so complex, even she couldn't tell where the exit was anymore. Then there was Ayan, the accidental victim, or something more, the man who received the midnight call, who stood at the center of the chaos. His story remained too clean, too convenient. The message he claimed changed his life? What if he wasn't the target, but the trap? And what about the figure in the CCTV footage? The one who made the final call, who walked like they knew exactly where the cameras were, and how long they had before the angle changed. They weren't Maheen. They weren't Ali. Their identity was still unknown. But the gloves they wore bore Maheen's symbol. Did she send them? Or were they watching her too? Then came the twist no one expected. A forensic analysis uncovered partial prints on the casing of the burner phone recovered near the crime scene. Not Ali's, not Maheen's, not Ayan's, but Detective Faraz's. It sent a shockwave through the department. Had he planted evidence, tampered with the investigation, or had someone used his own items to create confusion? To cast doubt where none existed before, every lead turned inward. Every person became a suspect in someone else's eyes. Trust dissolved like smoke. In meetings, silence replaced strategy. No one wanted to speak too much, say the wrong thing, be next, because now the truth was no longer about facts. It was about survival. The killer had blended in perfectly. So perfectly, in fact, that no one noticed when the blood was clean, when the lies were arranged, when the final move was played. Someone among them wasn't just watching the chaos unfold. They had created it. And until the last piece fell into place, no one, not even the investigators, could say with certainty who the killer really was. They had known each other since childhood. Ali and Faison were inseparable in their early years. Neighbors in a sleepy town, classmates through school, and partners in every mischief two boys could dream up. While Ali was quiet and meticulous, Faison was loud, charming, and unpredictable. They balanced each other like the edges of a broken coin. Two halves of something whole, but jagged if forced apart. But something happened between them during their final year of college. Something no one talked about, something that caused a sudden, permanent fracture. Faison dropped out. Ali moved to the city. They never spoke again. Until now, detectives reviewing the case stumbled upon Faison's name through phone records, buried among old contacts Ali hadn't called in years. But recently, there had been renewed activity. Late-night calls, short, cryptic messages, payments transferred between anonymous bank accounts, and a single voicemail deleted from Ali's phone but recovered by forensic analysts. "You owe me." Faison's voice had said, low and bitter, "and you know what I want." This changed everything. Faison was brought in for questioning. He denied involvement at first, claimed the calls were nothing more than awkward attempts at reconnection. But his story cracked under pressure. Eventually, he admitted the truth. He hadn't forgiven Ali, not for what happened in college, not for how everything fell apart after a single mistake Ali had made, an academic scandal Ali escaped by letting Faison take the fall. No one had known that part of the story. Faison was branded a cheater, expelled, and blacklisted, while Ali moved on, built a respectable life, got a job, wore nice shirts, smiled like nothing had ever gone wrong. Faison watched from the sidelines, rotting in resentment. So when he saw Maheen's cryptic post online, discussions about trust, betrayal, and hidden justice, he reached out, under a fake name. He fed her Ali's weaknesses, his past, his patterns. He didn't need to do much, just light the spark. He didn't claim to be part of the plan. He didn't confess to murder. But he confessed to something else, poisoning the roots of trust. He had planted doubt where it would grow strongest, not because he wanted money, not because he wanted exposure, because he wanted Ali to feel what it was like to lose everything, piece by piece. The irony was cruel. Ali, the man who trusted no one, had been undone by the only person he once believed in without question. And now, the investigation had twisted further. Was Fazen just a bitter friend seeking revenge? Or had he orchestrated something far more calculated, knowing that even a whisper of guilt in the right ear could collapse an entire life? The past, buried for years, had clawed its way back to the surface, and it had brought blood with it. It was discovered inside a rusted biscuit tin, tucked in the back of a wardrobe in Ali's childhood home, a folded piece of yellowing paper sealed in an unmarked envelope. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to his mother. Ali hadn't spoken about her much during the investigation. He described her only as quiet, sickly, not involved. But the truth was far more complicated. His mother, Zulika, had died when Ali was in his early 20s. Her passing had been sudden, unexplained. A heart attack, the doctor said. But those who knew her remembered something else. A woman consumed by paranoia in her final years. A woman who often sat by the window for hours, muttering about watchers, voices, hidden messages. Most dismissed it as illness, delusion, until the letters surfaced. It was addressed not to Ali, but to my second son. There was no second son. And yet, as investigators read through the shaky lines, the narrative unfolded like a locked door creaking open after years in darkness. In the letter, Zulika confessed to a secret that she had carried since before Ali's birth. Ali's father had not died in an accident, as he was told. He had disappeared. One morning, he left the house for a business trip and never returned. There were no police investigations, no searches, just silence and fear. Zulika hinted that she had been warned not to speak, that she had received anonymous threats, calls in the night, symbols carved into the garden gate, shadows watching her window. The letter grew more desperate toward the end. They made me raise him in silence, she wrote. They told me if I ever told him the truth, they'd make him disappear too. The final line read, Ali was never supposed to know who he really is. But if he's reading this, it means they've come back. Ali, when presented with the letter, refused to speak for hours. Then, finally, he broke down, not with rage, but with something colder, realization. He admitted that he had suspected something for years. The night terrors as a child, the strangers who lingered too long outside of school, the family photos with one face always cut out. But he had buried it all under routine, under structure, under control. Now the truth was undeniable. His life had been orchestrated from the start, not just by Maheen, not just by Fazen, but by something older, something silent, a past wrapped in deception, a mother who died protecting him from it, a father who vanished trying to escape it. This wasn't just about a murder. This was about a legacy, one built on lies, fear, and a name Ali was never meant to know. And with that one letter, his identity shattered. Because sometimes the dead don't leave secrets behind to be uncovered. They leave warnings. This deception didn't begin with a murder. It didn't begin with a phone call, or even with Maheen. Its roots stretched far deeper, into the past, into events long buried and deliberately forgotten. It was not a moment of madness, but a design years in the making. The investigators were nearing the end of their patience. The evidence was overwhelming, yet inconclusive. Too many players, too many coincidences. And then came the break they didn't expect. Not from a new witness, not from technology, but from a handwritten logbook found in the archives of a now-defunct private school in Murray. Ali's name appeared in the records, enrolled for just one term at the age of 9. But it wasn't his name that stood out. It was another, crossed out, rewritten, and marked transferred, confidential directive, The name was Ferris. The surname matched no one, but the guardian's signature did. Zulika. Further digging revealed that the identity, Ollie, had not existed legally until age 11. Before that, he had been enrolled under multiple aliases in 3 different cities, always staying just long enough to not be noticed, and then vanishing without explanation. His mother had carefully erased their trail, as if running from something or someone, but why? That answer came from an unlikely source, a retired intelligence officer who had served in a now-defunct surveillance unit known only by its code, Unit 17. The officer, a man in his 70s, agreed to speak anonymously. What he revealed left the room silent. Unit 17 had existed unofficially during the early 1990s, designed to observe and psychologically profile children deemed exceptionally perceptive, children with high emotional intelligence and advanced pattern recognition. Ali's father, it turned out, was one of the original analysts, but Wei refused to let his son become a subject of experimentation. He was reportedly removed, disappeared. Zulika fled, took Ali, changed names, changed cities, hid her child from an institution that no longer officially existed, but whose shadows lingered in the background for years. The symbols Maheen drew? Not her invention. They were modified from symbols used in Unit 17's behavioral charts. Symbols meant to track control, submission, fear. The silent I wasn't just metaphor. It was real. Maheen, either by coincidence or design, had tapped into something far older than herself. Her obsession with psychological manipulation, her ability to predict responses, her fascination with surveillance, it all mirrored the methods developed by Unit 17. And now, suddenly, everything began to make sense. Ali's paranoia, his calculated behavior, the anonymous messages, the fear etched into his mother's final letter. This wasn't a random crime of passion. It was the echo of a program that had never truly ended. Somewhere, someone had been watching all along. And maybe, just maybe, Maheen wasn't the one orchestrating everything. Maybe she had simply wandered into an unfinished experiment, one where Ali wasn't the victim. He was a variable, the fated subject of a study that began long before he ever learned how to lie. And the deception? It had never been about what was happening now. It had always been about what had already been done. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, legal aides, former colleagues, curious spectators, and a handful of strangers who had followed the case with an almost obsessive devotion. The air was tense, every breath shallow, every movement cautious. Outside, protesters held signs. Inside, silence reigned. The judge, stern and composed, called the session to order. On one side sat Ali, stoic, distant, unreadable. On the other, Maheen, calm, composed, and disturbingly serene. Behind them, Faison stared straight ahead, refusing to look at either of them. And still, the identity of the figure in the CCTV footage remained a mystery, as did the full extent of the crime that had dragged so many lives into its grip. The prosecution opened with a timeline, presenting digital evidence, phone logs, and CCTV clips. The audience listened to the story unfold. How the calls were made, how the burner phone was activated, how aliases were used to mislead law enforcement and blur the lines of responsibility. But the turning point came when the lead prosecutor introduced a new witness, a technician, a mid-level employee from a private data recovery firm, quiet, nervous, but holding a hard drive in his trembling hands. He had been hired, anonymously, to extract deleted files from a damaged laptop that had been mailed to his office weeks before the investigation began. No return address, no explanation. The job was paid in cash. Inside the hard drive were video recordings, dozens of them, secret footage, recorded conversations, hidden camera angles from Ali's apartment, from the bank, even from Maheen's bookstore. None of these locations had ever reported surveillance systems. Someone had been watching, meticulously, quietly, for months. The judge called a recess. When the court reconvened, one of the videos was played. It showed Ali and Maheen together in a dimly lit cafe. They weren't arguing. They weren't fighting. They were planning. The conversation was clipped, coded, but unmistakably deliberate. Phrases like "the subject will respond if primed emotionally," and he needs to believe it's his decision, echoed through the courtroom. The gasps were audible. Ollie stared at the screen, expression unchanged. Maheen turned her head slightly, watching the reaction of the jury instead of the footage. Everything changed in that moment, because what the courtroom had believed, a tangled web of betrayal, revenge, and emotional breakdown, was now being reframed as something else, an experiment. The defense tried to pivot, claimed the footage was manipulated, claimed consent was absent, but it was too late. The seed had been planted. Were Ollie and Maheen accomplices all along? Were they test subjects? Or researchers in disguise? And if so, who was the actual victim? The judge ordered a full review of the new evidence. Outside the courtroom, reporters shouted into microphones. Inside, no one spoke, because the real terror was no longer about who had committed the crime. It was about who had orchestrated the reality around it, and how much of what they believed had been real at all. The verdict was delivered on a cold, gray morning. Rain tapped gently against the courthouse windows, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside the courtroom, every eye was fixed on the judge. No one blinked. No one moved. For weeks, the trial had dominated headlines, and now, at last, justice was expected to speak. The judge, firm and deliberate, read from the final statement. Ollie was found guilty of obstruction, falsification of evidence, and conspiracy to manipulate an investigation, but not of murder. Maheen was convicted of willful psychological endangerment, fraud, and cyberstalking, but not of murder. Fazen was sentenced for aiding and abetting under false identity, but again, not murder. And that was a shock, because despite the chaos, the manipulation, the surveillance, and the fear, no one had been formally convicted of the killing that started it all. Ayan had disappeared midway through the investigation, vanished without a trace. His apartment empty, his accounts frozen, his name slowly slipping from the records like a ghost never meant to stay. And the unknown figure in the CCTV footage, the silent observer, the orchestrator in the shadows, had never been identified. No fingerprints, no sightings, no matches in any database. It was as if they had never existed at all. The public was furious. Commentators accused the system of failure. Online forums exploded with theories. Some believed Ayan was the true killer. Others claimed Maheen and Ollie had staged the entire crime for a social experiment that spun out of control. A few believed the unknown figure was part of a larger underground syndicate, perhaps even remnants of the long-buried Unit 17. But behind all the noise, behind the public outrage and media frenzy, a darker truth settled in quietly. This story didn't end in a courtroom, because what had been exposed during the trial wasn't just about a single crime. It was about how fragile reality could become when trust was weaponized, when perception was manipulated, when technology and emotion collided so precisely, the line between right and wrong vanished. Ollie was sent to prison. Maheen, after her sentencing, requested solitary confinement. Fazen disappeared from public life. And yet, whispers continued. Months later, a new message was posted anonymously to an encrypted forum once used by Maheen. It read, "The experiment isn't over. It just changed locations." Attached was a grainy image, another street, another figure in a long coat, another hand lifting a phone, the same gloves, the same symbol, the same silence. And with that, it became clear the courtroom had delivered its decision. But the game, the story, the deception, it had only just begun. The truth didn't arrive with drama. It didn't crash through doors or come wrapped in a confession. It walked quietly into courtroom, wearing a faded shawl and weathered shoes. Her name was Samira Bibi, an elderly janitor who worked nights at the building across from where Ayan had lived. No one had thought to question her. No one had even noticed her. But she had seen everything. She took the stand with trembling hands and a voice worn by time. When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, she looked at the judge and said, "Because no one asked." And then she spoke. That night, she had been sweeping the stairwell outside the flat across the street. She remembered it clearly because of the silence. It wasn't the usual late-night quiet. It was heavy, like something was holding the air still. She saw a man arrive. Not Ayan. Someone else. Tall, hooded, gloved. He didn't knock. He entered with a key. 5 minutes passed. Then another man arrived, Ollie, but he didn't go in. He stood at the bottom of the stairwell, looking up, frozen. Then Maheen appeared. From the alleyway, she didn't look surprised to see Ollie. She said something to him, too quiet for Samira to hear, but Ollie turned and left. Then, she said, the door upstairs slammed open. A scream, brief and cut off, echoed down the stairwell. The hooded man ran out. Samira saw his face as he passed under the street lamp, and she recognized him. He had visited the building before. Not once, several times. Always at night, always watching. She pointed to the courtroom sketch on the prosecution's board. That's not him, she said. She was certain. The figure in the CCTV footage wasn't the man she saw run out. There was someone else. A missing face. And then she told them what made her come forward. Weeks after the murder, someone had slipped an envelope under the door of her tiny apartment. Inside was a single photo of her sweeping that night, taken from a distance. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Keep sweeping. Stay silent." Her voice broke as she said, "I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone." But the fear never left. And now, with the courtroom frozen around her, she finally spoke what no one else could. The man who killed him wasn't Ollie. It wasn't that girl. It was someone else. And he's still out there. The silence in the room was absolute, because with that testimony, the narrative shattered. The web of lies, misdirection, psychological warfare, all led back to a single fact. Everyone had been looking at the same pieces, but no one had seen the full picture. And now, through the eyes of a woman no one had thought to notice, the truth had emerged. Not theory, not suggestion. An eyewitness, an untold moment, word for word. And in that moment, justice no longer felt like a ruling. It felt like a memory finally heard. The courtrooms emptied. The headlines faded. The city returned to its restless rhythm, pretending as if nothing had happened. But for those whose lives were entangled in the silent war of lies, fear, and manipulation, nothing would ever be the same. Ollie sat in his prison cell, no longer fighting to prove innocence or guilt. He had stopped speaking to the prison psychologist weeks ago, not out of defiance, but out of exhaustion. He no longer trusted words. For a man who once built his life on calculated logic and carefully measured decisions, he now found himself trapped in a place where nothing made sense, not even his own memories. He replayed it all, over and over. The phone call, the voice, Maheen's smile that never quite reached her eyes, phase in silence after betrayal. He wrote letters, not to send, but to document, to confess to himself, maybe, or to try and find a version of himself he had lost somewhere between truth and participation. And what haunted him most wasn't what he had done. It was what he had allowed to happen. Maheen, after sentencing, disappeared into the system. Solitary confinement. No visitors. No media access. She asked for books, psychology, human behavior, the history of secret societies. She read for hours, sometimes through the night. Officers reported her pacing, speaking softly to herself, scribbling in notebooks that were never allowed to leave the cell. She never cried, but once, late at night, a guard found her sitting on the floor, staring at the wall. On it, drawn faintly with pencil, was the symbol, the silent eye. Beneath it, she had written a single sentence. "I only wanted someone to see me." Faison returned to his hometown, but he didn't go unnoticed. People remembered. Old neighbors talked. His name became a whisper, a warning. He lived quietly, worked odd jobs, kept his head down. But guilt has a way of lingering even in silence. He was often seen alone at the graveyard, standing by a headstone no one else visited. His mother's. He never stayed long, but always left a single white lily. As for Samira Bibi, the woman who broke the silence, her life changed overnight. She was offered protection, even relocation, but she chose to stay. She said fear was no longer welcome in her home. She swept the same stairwells, past the same corners, but now she walked with her head high. And Ayan? He was never found. Some say he left the country. Some say he was taken. Others believe he was never real to begin with, that he was part of the game, a carefully crafted character meant to trigger chaos. But his apartment remained untouched. A cup still sat on the table. The window still cracked slightly open, as if he had stepped out for air and never returned. And the city? It learned nothing. People went back to their phones, back to headlines that came and went. Another scandal, another tragedy. But beneath it all, something had shifted. There were more cameras now, more passwords, more glances over the shoulder. Because once you learn that reality can be designed, that trust can be scripted, that your own mind can be used against you, nothing feels safe. This story did not end with justice. It ended with pieces left behind, damaged, sharp, unfixable. And the people? They didn't move on. They simply carried what remained. Because some crimes don't steal lives. They steal peace. And that kind of loss is forever. This was never just a story about a murder. It was about something far more intimate, far more dangerous. A single phone call, that's how it began. Ordinary, unthreatening. The kind of sound we hear every day, without fear, without suspicion. But that one ring shattered illusions. It exposed not only the fragility of trust, but the terrifying truth that sometimes what we don't know, what we choose not to know, can destroy us. We live in a world moving too fast to question. We scroll, we skim, we react. We trust faces because they smile. We believe voices because they sound calm. We take people at their word because it's easier than asking what's underneath. But what this story showed, brutally, painfully, is that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears politeness like armor. Sometimes it walks beside us, works with us, even loves us. And we never notice until it's too late. Ali trusted the system. Maheen trusted her illusion. Faison trusted revenge. And Ayan, if he was ever real, trusted a voice on the phone. All of them, in different ways, were blind to the truth until it swallowed them. We call it crime. But before it was crime, it was something else. A missed signal, a dismissed instinct, a doubt that was too uncomfortable to explore. This story is a reminder that awareness is not a luxury. It's a responsibility. We must question more, listen deeper, and never assume that silence means safety. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the threat in the shadows. It's our own refusal to look. Have you ever trusted someone completely, without question, without proof, only to realize later that everything you believed was a lie? If this story shook you, if it made you pause, made you think, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with others. Let them hear it. Let them question what they think they know. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chilling truth we uncover. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what part stayed with you. Tell us what you believe. And most importantly, tell us what story you want us to expose next. Because here at Crime Chronicles Confidential, no lie stays hidden forever. We don't just tell stories. We reveal the truths others are too afraid to face.